Thank you. Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we have been joined by Dr. Gupta also. My name is Dr. Ranjit Mehta.
Very nice to meet you.
Very nice.
I believe you know me.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Stanley. How are you? This is Mahendra Rustagi.
Yes, good to see you again. Thank you for
Kanchan is.
Yeah,
Mr. Stanley, you got a very nice, beautiful painting behind you.
Yes, this one purchased actually by the artist in Sri Lanka 35 years ago.
Oh.
He's a very young artist, and now he is quite famous, to put it this way. So he had a good talent. But there is so many talents in India, as you know. Even Dr. Gupta's daughter is also a famous artist.
Yes. Yeah, Kanchan, you were saying something.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Shirley. Yeah, good afternoon.
Dr. Gupta, have you? Mahendra ji, Ranjit ji, Kanchan. Dr. Stolle, have you? Pranav Podar this side.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you. So in Norway and in Europe, you probably are aware that it's a public holiday. So everyone is...
Good afternoon, everyone, all the participants. We have Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, Senior Vice President, PhD Chamber, Dr. JP Gupta, Chairman, Environment Committee, Mr. Thurley Harrison, who has joined us from Norway, then Mr. Mahendra Rustagi, Mr. Pranav Padar, Co-Chairman, Kanchan from PhD, and other ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to this webinar on Innovate for the Green Future. As the commitment of India is very resolved, that shows that our Prime Minister has already committed 175 gigawatt of solar and renewable energy by 2022 to really, this is the unflinching commitment of India to combat the global warming. On the same lines, to create the green future, hydrogen fuel is extremely important even for the energy security of India. So to begin the program, I would request our Senior Vice President, Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, to give his formal welcome address for today's webinar. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I heartily welcome our speaker for the webinar, Mr. Sterling Harold Pedersen, Chairman of the Board, Greenstart Hydrogen India Private Limited, and Fiber Strength International India Private Limited, Norway. And all the participants who have joined in this webinar, especially including the Chair of our Environment Committee, Dr. JP Gupta, and his co-chairs, Mr. Rustagi and Mr. Podar, and our Principal Director, Dr. Ranjit Mehta, and our colleague, Ms. Kanchan Jutchi, and all the other dignitaries and members of the Chamber who are attending this webinar. The subject of the webinar today is the hydrogen production technology and relevance of hydrogen fuel in India. I hope to learn quite a bit, because my knowledge about hydrogen is limited to hydrogen as an element, one of the elements and one of the gases, and not at all as an environment-friendly fuel, which is what we are going to talk about. So I hope to be very much enlightened today. Hydrogen, of course, is the simplest and most abundant element on the earth. It can play a bigger energy role, hopefully, once we are able to overcome the critical cost levels that are probably still there to be crossed. But once they are crossed and we are able to reach that level, then probably it should become at one stage as efficient and as preferable renewable energy as solar or wind or hydro or the other alternatives. I think probably hydrogen is going to be one of the simpler alternatives to a high-tech alternative like probably nuclear even. I'm not sure. I don't really know. I would like to learn more from Dr. Saleh. But one thing is sure, that hydrogen is the fuel of green future, and it will positively become one of the foundations for a sustainable energy economy. From industrial to domestic use, the way forward is the use of hydrogen as a main fuel, in which, as a fuel in which there are no pollutants or greenhouse gases. Since the only byproducts are water and heat, you can't produce anything by burning hydrogen except to combine it with oxygen. So you do end up getting water. That's my basic school chemistry, which I remember. So the ability to use a fuel with a zero carbon footprint represents a revolution in energy and transportation. There is, I would request somebody to, is probably having his mic on while speaking. The ability to use a fuel with a zero carbon footprint represents a revolution in the energy and transportation sector. Also, hydrogen has a great potential to reduce our reliance on imported energy sources, which is, of course, one of the largest expenditure that we incur on our foreign exchange front. And if we are able to overcome it substantially, I think that by itself can provide a great fillip to our economy and its GDP. So, since the hydrogen, I think there is a disturbance. Will the host please mute everybody except the speaker? Will the host please mute everybody except the speaker? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Since hydrogen fuel cells emit no harmful pollutants and has efficiencies much greater than the current fossil fuel sources, one can create a greatly diversified energy economy. And of course, it would require more investment, which is one of the things we'd like to understand today from Mr. Saleh. The planet Earth is facing an energy crisis. Human race must grow, develop, and move past the old and inefficient ways of generating energy into a future where clean and efficient hydrogen fuel cells generate energy for years to come. In this transition into a hydrogen economy, the human race will have utilized an energy source that can power the Earth for thousands of years, maybe millions. So with these words, I feel privileged in welcoming Mr. Peterson to enlighten us and elaborate on the hydrogen production technology and the relevance of hydrogen fuel in India. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, you have set the tone for today's webinar. And also we have Dr. JP Gupta, who himself is a very distinguished scientist, also the chairman of our environment committee. I will request Dr. Gupta to give his industry perspective for today's webinar on hydrogen fuel as an alternative.
And Dr. JP Gupta is, of course, our technology resource, especially
Yes.
on environment and climate. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Definitely. Dr. Gupta, can you unmute yourself? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Dear friends, good afternoon once more. Good afternoon, Mr. Sterle. We at PhD Chamber are used to listen about the GDP, about the share price, about the EBITDA, and all such things. But today, Mr. Sterle Peterson, he is going to take you through a virgin territory of hydrogen, a fuel which is almost pollution free. Renewable hydrogen is going to be a path-breaking renewable fuel for the future. And it is going to be really a path-breaking to accentuate the climate change. Regarding Sterle concern, I would like to speak very few words about him, because from the economist, from a successful CEOs of many companies, a visionary, but I am reminded of a quote from a Greek philosopher about Sterling. The ultimate value of life depends upon awareness and the power of contemplation rather than mere pursuits for materialistic pursuits. This dictum holds the key to the fulfilling and meaningful life which Sterling manifests. Sterling Peterson is indeed a true friend of India. I assure you, my friends, I am not going to talk about hydrogen at all because you are going to listen very interesting story about the hydrogen fuel from manufacturing, particularly the challenges with respect to the costing, with respect to the regulatory mechanism, with respect to the safety aspect of hydrogen. And I can tell you, not only that he is one of the key person in Norway driving hydrogen, but he is a key person in India as well to drive the important movers of hydrogen in India. And with these few words, I will like to listen and learn more from Sterling Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Sterling. Please enlighten us today on this hydrogen fuel. Thank you indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. The expectation is quite high, I understand. They're the distinguished scientists and members of the PhD commercial chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues who are joining us today. It's a privilege for me and a big honor to join you today to talk about this subject of Innovate for the Green Future and the production technology and the relevance for hydrogen fuel in India. I will try to share my presentation with you. So if you would bear with me, I will try to bring it up here. Let's see. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So what I would like to do for you today is to go through this the presentation and let me see if I can. Some technical issues here.
Dr. Ranjit Mehta, some problem?
Yes, there is.
No, he's just trying to fix. I think Mr. Sterling, please let me know if there is any problem.
Yep, we will.
You are not. You can share it again. Then maybe the problem will not be there.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I tried to do. It's.
I'm sure your internet bandwidth is much higher than what we are using it here.
Yeah, seems to be some challenge here with this. I'll try one more time, or if not, I will take it.
Mr. Sterling, let me check with my team here. We have your copy of presentation. Let me check if we can just run it. Just a second.
If our technical person can share it from there, Kanchan, Paramjit, you can send it to Paramjit or.
I think that's a good idea.
Are you able to see it? Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me start again to give you a kind of the introduction to the themes that we are going to discuss today. A little bit about the background of the climate change and how climate change is really setting the ground and the framework for how we need to meet some of the challenges that we have on Earth today of decarbonization and to find sustainable alternatives.
Yeah, Mr. Sterling, we have just shared your presentation. You can please go ahead.
Okay, so do you have it now?
Yes.
Yeah, we do have. We are just running it from here, from India. You can just please go through according to your slides.
Okay, very good. So we are then on the introduction here, and what I would like to use this time to go through is to kind of put this in a perspective, a little bit about the background for why hydrogen is now a new, how to say, topic that is discussed all over the world, and how this can be an important instrument to solve some of the challenges that we have today with regard to the climate changes that affect us in so many ways. I will then move on to give you kind of a brief introduction to hydrogen as an energy carrier. So you take a look at the characteristics and the benefits and some of the energy sources when it comes to material that can be used in this process. A little bit about why green hydrogen is now an important part of the energy mix in Europe, North America, Japan, and also in Korea and China. I would like to take a look at the barriers and enablers and what is the catch. Why is hydrogen not implemented all over the world already? And also try to make you understand some of the importance of hydrogen in the energy transition within the government and what kind of role the government plays with other stakeholders like the industry and the general public, research institutes and so forth. It is quite important that there is an alliance and a partnership between the government, because the government's framework would really be accelerating or be a barrier for the development and the acceleration of hydrogen as part of the energy mix. So I would like to go into that aspect as well, and also talk about the long-term regulatory framework for the energy transition, what needs to be put in place, if you are going to catch up with your neighbors and also make this a viable part of your solution in the energy sector. I would also like to talk about Norway's role and how Norway have been going from being an oil and gas nation now to the work with renewables, and we have done that for the last 2 decades. And this is a new growth opportunity for Norway, as we see that the decline in oil and gas revenues would come in the next decades. We have kind of reached the peak for our oil and gas production, and we want now to focus on the renewable, and this is the billion-dollar industry that will be much larger than the oil and gas business in the coming years when it's coming to investments. So let me go back a little bit to ask a question, why the interest in hydrogen energy now, after so many years. There has been renewed upsurge and interest in hydrogen, and there is several developments that have combined to cause governments again to focus their attention on hydrogen. This includes the growing urgency to address climate change by reducing greenhouse gases and emissions, which is crucial, and which most countries have agreed to through the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. This is providing demand push as zero-emission hydrogen is regarded as an important means of reducing the emission. And the large and growing investment in hydrogen end-use technologies that we have seen in the last couple of years has also created a demand pool for hydrogen. There is today significant investment in identifying reliable and sustainable hydrogen supply chain solutions. And again, this is also creating a demand push in the market. So all these kind of events are occurring at the same time, and we see new technologies are being developed and deployed that can put downward pressure on the cost of producing and storing and transporting and using the hydrogen to the end consumer. This will in turn help to increase the commercial viability of hydrogen. And what we have seen in Norway and Europe and UK, that the government has been setting up and subsidizing and giving direct capital to different demonstration projects, both in France and Belgium, Germany, Denmark, and so forth. And there has been an incredible transition from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel. For instance, in Denmark, 40% of the electricity is coming from wind, which for some years ago was not competitive at all. However, the investment over the years in solar and wind in the renewable sector has been putting pressure, and every time the capacity have doubled, the cost, the capex have been reduced by 15 to 20%. And today we see that the industry is competitive with fossil fuel. So I just also want to kind of put this into the climate and the environment perspective. As you all know, the climate today is really under pressure. We see that the temperature is increasing, and we see the weather conditions are unstable. We see that people are migrating due to they can't live because they can't support water or the food for the population. And we see conflict arising around the world. So this is a very pressing issue to get resolved. Fossil fuel is, as we all know and agree to, not the answer for how we can continue making sustainable growth on Earth. And to make sure that we are not damaging our Mother Earth, we need to make these changes now. It's too late to wait, so we have to invest even if you see that the hydrogen solution is not always competitive with the fossil fuel. But I will come back to show you how some of the governments around the world have been setting up policies that make it possible to put hydrogen as part of the energy mix today, and actually is the only answer to be able to fulfill some of the requirements or fulfill the commitments that has been made through the different international protocols. So let me show you a little bit about, or give you a short introduction to hydrogen and some of the characteristics and benefits of it. And I think that the most important part with hydrogen is that hydrogen is the most abundant element on the planet and can be produced from any primary energy source, including hydrocarbons and renewables. And as you can see from the illustration, there is different ways or different materials that we can source. Natural gas has been one of the key components in producing hydrogen today, and 99% of all the hydrogen that we produce today is coming from natural gas and through the steam methane reforming. Steam methane reforming is perhaps one of the most mature technologies for producing hydrogen. However, green hydrogen, you need also to do what we call carbon capture, usage and storage, CCS. CCS has been something that has been quite challenging. Norway have been working with it for about 15 years and have demonstrated that it is feasible, and is now setting up a facility on a commercial basis where they are collecting CO2 from different industries, and they bring it to the facilities on the West Coast where they are storing it under the sea level, 2,000 meters under the sea level. This way you can use steam methane reforming with fossil fuel and still avoid CO2 emission. However, what we are focusing on is the green hydrogen, and green hydrogen is created by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. We call this process electrolysis, and the electrolysis of water is the decomposition of the water into oxygen and hydrogen gas due to the passage of electric current. This technique can be used to make hydrogen gas, a main component of hydrogen fuel, and breathable oxygen as well. And you can mix them, the two together, and you get oxygen, hydrogen, who are also usable fuel, but it is more volatile and dangerous than hydrogen. Other things that is worth mentioning is that hydrogen has no emission at the point of usage. It can be used in fuel cells, as we all know, or internal combustion engines, and it has been used for more than almost 2 decades now. The first car was coming out in 2003, and fuel cell cars and buses has been around for quite a long time. Last year it was produced about 7,000 cars, and this year we are talking about 30,000+ cars. Next year it's more than 100,000 cars, and the number of models and variation in the car is increasing. But the focus has been primarily on public transportation, and we see that fuel cells are used in buses. In Norway, in Oslo, we deployed hydrogen buses 3-4 years ago, and they are running in London, in Paris, in many cities in Germany. You see it also on trains. And what Norway has been doing is that in the transportation sector, they have also now designed for the maritime industry. So what we see there is passengers, ships is now has now been introduced, and is a project that is going to be launched this year, or has been launched this year. And we see that the government is actually using, when they are putting out tender, they're using the purchasing power they have to basically demand and require from the supplier sustainable solution. That means either that the cars or that passenger ships and so on, which is linked to the licenses to run these routes, has to provide electric cars or hydrogen cars. This way, the government can create the demand for hydrogen buses, hydrogen ships and ferries, and so forth. So it's quite important, as I say, that the government is using this purchasing powers as one of the biggest, players in the market. Another thing which I would like to also mention before I get into the other characteristics of the hydrogen, which is the flexibility, is that, as I mentioned, 99% of the hydrogen is today, that we produce today, is coming from fossil fuels. Natural gas is the number one, and we have released 830 million tons of CO2 by this production every year. And that just show how much we can, improvement we can do just to convert this production by CCS, that we are storing it. And as I will also show you later on when we talk about the relevance to India, of course, India has enormous natural resources in coal, and you could use coal as a source of energy in this steam methane reforming process as a substitute for natural gas or oil and other material. So the gray hydrogen is, of course, far cheaper today, and that's why they produce green hydrogen with CCS. That would cost $1.5 a kilo. But if you are looking at the green for renewable, we are talking about 2.5. But just 1 year ago, we were talking about that it was 5 to 10 times more expensive. So we see that even every month, we see that there is improvement in the technology that is moving and pushing this forward, and the cost capex is going down almost by the day. So if India is going to catch up with its neighbor and be part of this, they need to step up, and the government need to put the framework in place, make sure that there is a platform and an arena where the different stakeholders are sharing their knowledge and technology and experience. That will make it a powerful, industry, put a platform from a powerful industry. So I think this is one of the things that I will come back to a little bit later, but one of the things that, or the characteristics of hydrogen is, of course, the flexibility. You can use it in any forms almost you like. And as you can see, which was also mentioned before, it is clean. And if you are talking about the high energy density by the mass, we are talking about 120 to 142 U per kilo, which is the highest energy density by any fuel. And if you compare them to gasoline, for instance, we are talking about 3.93 liter to get the same energy mass out of it. If you look at the illustration of the energy source of the future, here you see the kind of the process which you would have with electrolysis, where you first split it into hydrogen and oxygen. Then you store it, and when you want to bring it back again, then you would go through a fuel cell process where you kind of are reversing the process, where you would then need the oxygen, and you put in the hydrogen, and you get the heat and the water and the electricity or the steam that you need to produce electricity. In many cases, people are talking about safety, and there is concern about the safety. But I can say that hydrogen is probably much more safer than fuel that we currently are used to power our cars. When it burns, when gasoline burns, then you would see that you have ash, and you have radiation, and you have many, how to say, reactions that you don't have with hydrogen. Hydrogen don't have any ashes, very little radiation. And when you have releases, it will also dissolve quickly in the atmosphere. However, as with everything, you need to make sure that you have good knowledge about how to handle it, and you need good safety management. But the design that we see today in the solutions has been designed very well, and I think that most people agree that safety is not an issue anymore for hydrogen. What is even more attractive to hydrogen is that it is storable. That means that when you have excess of renewables, which you would have quite often, and India today even have more production that they can consume of renewables. However, they can't transform it or transport it into the grid, because the grid doesn't have the capacity. And demand for electricity doesn't kind of always match the production for renewables. On the contrary, normally there is larger demands on nights and times where you cannot produce solar. Wind doesn't necessarily produce every day. So you need to be able to have a system where you can switch on, and you can take the excess hydrogen at times when you would have more and enough of it, and then you store it, and then you can switch it back. Or you can store it for seasonal demand, which is used in Europe, where you have a winter where you need heating and so forth, and there is a larger demand for electricity. So that is one of the beauty with hydrogen, that it's storable. And then you can also transport it. You can transport it to the other parts of your country where there is a need. You don't have to develop the grid. You can do it through pipelines, compressed or liquid, but you can also attach it to other liquid material to make it easier to transport it. And there is many different pilot projects ongoing to see how to be able to make this in a more efficient manner than it is today. But if you are looking at UK, they're using now existing pipelines to kind of mix hydrogen into the natural gas to the end consumers. But also they are now developing solutions to the end consumers through the network, which is only based on hydrogen. And the Norwegian company, known under the name Statoil, but now Equinor, has joined with gas companies in the UK to set up the first hydrogen network for the consumer. So it's just showing that things are going very fast in this sector. So if you are looking at the relevance for hydrogen in India, I think that this was also mentioned earlier today, there is three major things that we need to focus upon. The energy security, of course, India depends heavily on oil and gas, and there is limitations on coal reserves that India have today because you don't have the CCS technology implemented. But if you went on this journey and used the technology for CCS, then you would have an opportunity to actually use your coal reserves, fossil reserves, as part of this transition to 100% renewable as well. Because I think that we are talking about the energy mix. The main purpose here is to reduce the CO2 and the greenhouse gases as quickly as possible, at least to meet the international the commitments that India have been doing. In Europe, they basically say that without hydrogen as part of the energy mix, we would not be able to meet these commitments that has been made in Paris to cutting the emission. So that is one part. Another part is, of course, is the air pollution. India has urban air pollution that is one of the highest in the world. And clearly, to be able to address this in a quick manner, hydrogen would be also a part of it. And we see now Indian Oil is, deploying buses which use hydrogen, that mix it into natural gas. Of course, that will reduce some of the emission. However, to be able to reach the goal, you need to transform the whole transport sector to be using green hydrogen, where you have no CO2 emission. But also, when we are talking about the climate policy commitment that has been made, again, I want to stress that it is important that the government not only making policies, but actually are a very active player in this development of hydrogen as part of the energy mix. There is too much uncertainties in this. And the world is now embarking on energy transition. And even if there is several unknowns, there will be further adoption of green hydrogen in the world. And we see it now changing policies from most of the governments. We see that there is a new carbon regimes. That means that there is coming taxes on pollutive, as I say, pollution in most countries today. And of course, this is one of the challenges for India. You have very low energy taxes. So you have not the opportunity that other countries have, like Norway, where we have really high taxes on cars and everything that is polluting, you have to pay taxes on. Norway transition to electric cars went very, very fast. Actually, there has been a limited of, cars, even if there is now produced 2.3 million electric cars. In Norway, there was waiting lines for getting electric cars. And this new car sales is now between 60 and 70% of all new car sales. And this was done by the government. Actually didn't level any taxes on the cars, but have 150% on imported cars. Norway don't produce any cars. So that just showed that when people could get a very good car to comparatively same price, actually a little bit less, they don't pay any taxes for parking or toll, driving your car with ferries or whatever, which everybody else have to pay, you go for free. So this is, of course, showing how important the government's policies are to make incentives and make it competitive. And then you need to use your tax regimes to be able to fund it even when you want to set up the infrastructure. Because that is one of the main things the government needs to participate in this investment for the infrastructure, because it takes time to develop it, and the stakeholders need to know that the government provide a framework that can share some of these costs. We have seen, for instance, in Japan, that the government in Japan, through the Olympics that was postponed now, what did they do? Every car, the bus in the Olympics was a hydrogen car and bus. And that is to show that Japan takes this seriously, and it is now planned more than 120 filling stations, hydrogen filling station in Tokyo alone. And we see it in Korea that the government there is building cities based on hydrogen infrastructure. So this is the way to transition that we see. So from 2000 to the end of last year, it was a total of 252 megawatts of green hydrogen projects that has been deployed. Not that much, but in the next 5 years, we see that 3,205 megawatts of electrolysis is dedicated to green hydrogen. And that is an increase of 1,300%. And I think this number is too low. I think it's going to be much more when we see the momentum this transition is taking, the commitments that has been made, not only by the government in Norway and in Germany and in UK and so forth, but there is urgency because we need to address some of the environmental challenges that we are facing. And they're getting more and more serious by the day if you don't address these issues. And the only solution, as far as most people knowledgeable in the energy sector say, that hydrogen is the only solution that we have to be able to meet it within the deadlines that we have put on the table. So what is the catch? Well, you can see from the illustration here how the cost has been going down. So the capex cost is too high. So there needs to be worked on this to make it competitive. But most people think that this would be competitive. Within the next 5 years, I think it will be even less with the momentum that is building up. But this is a great industry, and for India to kind of catch up with its neighbors, and also to be able to fulfill the obligations that they have made in this area, they need to really move forward with speed, and they have to set up the infrastructure. And one of the ways to do this is, of course, to set up an institute or a platform where you have all the stakeholders working together, and where you can bring in experience, knowledge from overseas to participate in this transition. And that's why I have recommended that India is setting up the Center of Excellence for Hydrogen, where you can get transferred technology, experience, know-how, and you can see best practices, because it takes time for a country to put everything in place, to kind of reduce the uncertainty, to bring the confidence of the investors, and also to build this industry in India. Then you can't start from scratch. You have to look what is the best practices, what have they done in different countries when it's coming to develop this industry, and what is the key success factors. And if you kind of look at others, you don't have to start from scratch. There is regulation, there's standards and protocols. You can't develop, for instance, a standard for 350 bar on the storage, when internationally you have 700 bars. That means that your industry cannot produce, if you choose to then produce this storage tanks, which you should do at some point, when you have entered into these joint ventures and cooperation with other leading companies, then these products should be able to sell in any country. So that's why it's so important that that you are, as I say, aware of what is the best practices, what is the international standard, so you can match it and you can make your industry compatible and competitive in this area as well. A little bit about the barriers. Time is flying, so as I said, hydrogen technologies are still in the early stage of deployment and face operational cost challenges. However, as I also mentioned, is that development of cross-departmental hydrogen strategies within the government should be a priority for the Indian government. Because there is a need for major commitment, as I mentioned. Substantial funding is also needed. And the government need to, as I say, allocate this in a way that they can see that they can start harvesting and they can start implementing the technology as part of the energy policies and into the energy mix. There is, of course, a lot of uncertainty about future streams, revenue streams for the stakeholders. And that's why the government needs to support and help to build this confidence that I was talking about in the early stage of this energy technology. So there is a need to design schemes to promote the deployment of low carbon generation technologies, allowing them to achieve cost down and mass market deploying at the key, would be a key success factor. It would be not possible to build this industry without the participation of the government and the partnership with the industry. In Norway or in UK or any of the leading countries, even China and Korea, you see that the government is playing a very, very active role in pushing this forward and make sure that they are listening to the industry and what needs the industry have to make sure that they have an industry that have the knowledge, have the funding to do the pilot project and set up the solution for India. The hydrogen economy is just about the transition from the fossil fuel to the non-fossil fuel. And we talked about the value chain, and we can't kind of cover all of that, but in the value chain, you have everything from the green production, which is, we are talking about then zero emission from CO2. So if you do it with coal or natural gas, which we call kind of blue, then we need to use CCS, which basically means that we are storing the carbon, the CO2 in the process, or we choose to do it on renewable, which you should actually focus on. The reason why I'm saying that you can use coal in a kind of a transition period here is that I know that it's very difficult, see it here in Norway, to kind of give up to your oil and gas or your natural resources. And it can be a kind of a way to ease this transition as well. But in this value chain, you also have the storage, which is an important part. That there needs to be some efficiency here. But we see it now, a lot of investment. And for instance, to take Australia, they have just now decided to invest in a 300 million facility to produce renewable energy and or green hydrogen on renewable energy. And they are going to produce 25 tons a day powered by wind and solar. And they get about 85 megawatts from solar and 75 from wind. And this is just showing how fast this development is going. And I can mention a lot of projects in all sectors that is covering the hydrogen economy and this transition. We see it also that Australia and Japan is working on a cooperation where they are producing hydrogen in Australia based on renewables, and then they convert it to the ammonia, and they already built the ship, and I think the first shipment went to Japan, where they can then convert back to energy. And I also mentioned this project with Equinor and Statoil and the gas distributor in UK, where they now not only blend hydrogen into the natural gas, but also do pure green hydrogen distribution. And of course, cars and buses are an important part of the pollution. And that is a sector that has been giving a lot of attention. In Norway, what we did was that we set up so-called clusters. And these clusters are in the maritime, where there is a huge savings. So now they have been building, designing ferries, passenger ships, and so forth. And they are under constructions and will be operating within 2 years. They have done small demo projects and all of it. So the technology is working. The whole distribution setup is available. And we see it also in the car, where now dispensing and filling station is set up all over in Norway and in other countries. Yes, a little bit about long-term regulatory framework for, as you can see, again, the key word here is government participation. Government need to set up the framework, need to reduce the risk, need to support the development of the infrastructure. I think that what we see is that the government is good to implement the policies, but they are not that good to make policies, but not that good to implement the policies. And they seems to think many times that they would do it by themselves and not ask for help and not get the support. The Norwegian government has been trying and have been offering India support and help because it is important for Norway, it is important for the world, but also Norway has a lot of technology. The leading companies in the catalysator industry is a Norwegian company called Nel, which is a spin-off of Norsk Hydro, who was going back to the early 1800s, and they produced hydrogen since 1923. So we have a lot of knowledge and technology in all parts of the value chain. And we are producing, setting up now new the production facility for green hydrogen. As you know, Norway not only have oil and gas, but we also provide hydrogen power and electricity 100% by renewables in Norway. But we are building also wind parks and not as much as sun parks in Norway, but REC is a leading producer of solar panels, and the technology is well known and developed in Norway as well. So I would say that if we are going to achieve the goals, then we need to really work together. And I hope that Norway can assist India in the transition from fossil to non-fossil. Hydrogen is today at the maturity level for the technology that it can be implemented. There is, of course, cost capex issues that need to be resolved, but this is an ongoing process and something that takes place in any industry, in any technology, but it is not an excuse to wait. We need to act now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trulle. That was a very, very extensive and very, very, very meaningful presentation that you have given on hydrogen fuel. And there have been some questions from our attendees, which I would like to put before you. So, first question that we have is from Mr. Sanjeev Gupta from NextGen. He writes, could you also clarify how green hydrogen provides storage besides green energy? Why is it so unique?
Well, first of all, you can store it in many different ways. One is that you can store it as a liquid. You can use it as an attachment to the other organic material. So you can transport it wherever you would like to, where you have a need for it. You can store it in caves, so you have the volume, and then you can convert it back when you need it. There is the flexibility that the storing of the energy is unique, because we produce a lot of energy, renewable energy today, that we can't utilize, that is waste. So if you use this technology, and that's what many companies are doing today, they are taking the excess green or renewable energy, and they convert it into hydrogen and they store it. And then when they either transport it to the other countries, they transport to other parts of the country. This energy cannot be, you can't transport it on the current grid because there is no use for it. So this is access to what you have in demand. So that's why, storing is a thing that you can only do with fossil, because you have oil tanks. But for renewables, you have to use it when you have it. And sometimes you don't have any production. And so then you need to kind of use the hydrogen to produce it. So you can deliver electricity at all times. You can't accept that you have to switch on and off the power supply. So that's why it is important. You can balance the grid, and you can balance it out of the consumption.
Thank you very much. In fact, you have talked about the carbon capture technology, the CCS technology. Then Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, he wants to know what will be the cost difference once we use this technology. So what will be the difference in the cost as far as the energy produced by coal? So could you,
Well, that depends, of course, on the price of the coal, but clearly the coal is less than natural gas. So to just do that comparison, it will be very beneficial and cost competitive. Clearly, the CCS projections is that it is competitive with what we call gray hydrogen. So gray hydrogen is when you have the emission of CO2. So if you are competitive with natural gas, you would certainly be compatible with coal. So that is, of course, I don't like talking about utilizing the fossil fuel, but on the other hand, I think it is important to say that you need to do compromises, and renewable energy has its limitation. That's why storage is the key here. But again, because of the density, we have some challenges there. You can't put everything on a can, and you need to find other ways to do it. But there is a lot of ways that you can store and transport besides putting it on in liquid form or in a gas form. compressed
Okay.
gas.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now, Mr. Himanshu Gupta writes, how to resolve the challenges associated with storing and distribution of hydrogen? Can it only be resolved through economy of scale, which may be difficult at the initial testing stages?
I think that it is about economy of scale. I think that the storage and transportation, it's about infrastructure. I think it's important to keep in mind that you can decentralize this, and you can kind of how to say, you can balance it. You don't need to build big centralized production facilities where you don't have the needs. You can actually, this is electrolysis are based on modules, so you can kind of set it up and add to it as we see the need or the demand for electricity is increasing. So one of the problems today is that the grids are not efficient, and they are, how to say, not capable of managing the load. So you need to then invest more and more in the grid. Here you can decentralize it, and you can, for the big centralized units, you can then store it and you can transport it to other. You can do it by pipeline. You can do it through oil pipeline as well. Earlier, there was a concern that you couldn't do that because we were thinking about liquid forms of transportation, but of course now you can attach the hydrogen to other material or to other liquid fuel, and then you can transport it just like you do with LNG or with oil as well. So in the US, they are now looking at pipe system that they don't use anymore to see how they can distribute hydrogen as part of this organic material that they attach hydrogen to.
Okay, that's nice. Now, you know, there are, in fact, some the cost factors. Like right now, most of the developing world is using all fossil fuels. Now, Mr. Purvatalu Dumarju, he wants to know what is the confidence level of making green hydrogen competitive with existing fossil fuel based based up to around 2025, he's written. Are we addressing the material challenges in electrolysis routes extra?
Well, I think that there is certainly confidence. The last 2 years, I think that the whole investment, as I say, the banking system, everyone is focused on it. Let me just explain. In Norway, if you want to invest in a factory, they would look at if the factory is sustainable. If you have CO2, you pay higher interest on your loans. So the whole society is now driven by try to contribute or to achieve this change in thinking and habits. So when we are looking at the technology is mature, but it needs to be developed. The capex is still too high, but that is because we are producing a small number of units. But when this number of units is going up, the cost will come down. So for sure, in 2025, all feasibility studies all agree that the capex is not going to be the issue. Then you are back to the OPEX, and that is the cost of the electricity and the energy that you are converting. And of course, there is some inefficiency here compared to the batteries and to others. But we have to look at this not only to compare one-to-one. We have to look at the environment, what it means to the environment. We have to look at the health. We have to look at the whole picture. So that is why when the government in Norway want to have changes, It is the seat belts and so on. First of all, they asked everybody, please use seat belts. Nobody used it. Very few. When they put the law in, people complained for 3 months. After that, it was natural. It was a habit. And it is the same with smoking. Norway was also in smoking. And it is the same now how we are separating our garbage. We have 5 bins in the house where we have to put everything into these different bins. And we are using it as a biomass as well. So I would say that this is about the governments, has to say, and all the stakeholders coming together and to make this transition happen. So I believe that by 2025, yes, we will be the cost competitive with natural gas and everything else. So that is not even the question. The question is, how can we scale it up and how can we make the transportation sector efficient? In Norway now, they are coupling the different sectors like the maritime and the transportation sector together, because the infrastructure is quite expensive, and to be able to find the right balance and make it commercially viable, then they have to work together again to set up this filling station to keep down the cost of the building the infrastructure. But you see now in ferries, in the passengers, trains, everything is lined up for non-emission.
Okay, so now we have a very interesting question. As Mr. Thalle, you know that India has a target of achieving 100 gigawatt of solar power by 2022. We already have around 75 gigawatt that we are producing with solar. So now here's a question: what is the world status of future of photo-electrochemical water splitting technology for converting solar energy to hydrogen? If you could throw some light on this.
Well, here we would use electrolysis, of course, which has been explained. There is 2 technologies here. It is alkyne and it is PEM technology. And now later on, there has been also developed some, how to say, the combination of the 2. But they are quite efficient, quite mature. Alkyne catalysts have been, electrolysis have been around for 100 years. It is used, as I mentioned, in the industry, in the chemical industry in particular. And this is where one of the major markets where you can produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, to these industries. This is perhaps the shortest and long-hanging fruit within producing green hydrogen, because here you have a lot of use today. And as I mentioned, we are talking about 8 to 9 tons CO2 for every ton of hydrogen they are producing. So you can erase that by producing green hydrogen to the industry. And again, I don't know to what extent India has this carbon quota and penalties to the industry, but in Norway and in Europe, there is high penalties to the industry to have this CO2 emission. And this is what you need to do. You need to try to find a balance. And that's why you need also to help the industry to take this initiative themselves, because you can't rely upon goodwill from everyone to implement these changes. They need help and they need support, and by cash and knowledge.
Okay. So another question, thank you very much, we have is, this question was from Rohit Srivastav, what you just answered. We have another question from Chandra Kaushik. He writes, can hydrogen be stored on graphene at large scale for transportation?
Yeah, there has been, as I said, a lot of the research projects how to store hydrogen, and that is one of them. I don't know that particular the status of it. but there is, as I said, a lot of material where they try now to store hydrogen, to combine it. As I said, ammonia is perhaps one of the most interesting and which has come quite far, and where they have built ships and where they transport today from Australia to Japan. But there is a long range of research going on in this area, and hopefully this will improve so you can store more to cheaper, because this is about price. So the future looks quite bright in this area, because now there is a lot of initiatives all over, and the momentum is just the last 2 years completely different from what it was 5 years ago. And that's why it's interesting to see that there is a resurgence now, and everybody wants to be, how to say, are running after hydrogen now. Before there were, not that much, how to say, understanding how important, what role it could play in the energy mix.
Okay, so there have been many, in fact, messages. They appreciated your presentation, and also they want your presentation, though we have it. So we would like to take your permission if you would like us to share it with them.
Yes, and there is a few also the videos that 2 videos that I think that people can just watch if they want. One is from Nell, and one is from one of the cluster in Norway, because there is quite a few clusters that it's kind of built up in a hierarchy, where you see that the involvement of people, everyday people, how concerned they are about Mother Earth, and how they are mobilizing, and how they are, as I say, demanding this change by the government and participation and so forth. The framework needs to be in place. And I think that perhaps that is could spur some of this acceleration in this transition in India as well. And as I mentioned, GreenSat has just set up, and we are there to set up this Center of Excellence. And those who want to participate in this is really welcome, can contact me. And also we can assist to bring companies from Norway. We are representing all the companies that is working within the hydrogen sector in Norway. So if there is anyone who is looking for some partners, they can also contact me, and I will help them to connect to the right people, depending whatever the issue must be.
That's wonderful. Mr. Sterle. So before I invite Mr. Mahinder Rustagi, if Dr. JP Gupta has any point to make, our chairman. You can unmute Dr. Gupta. Yeah.
In fact, it has been a very interesting presentation, covering from production to the regulatory up to the safety aspect. And the most important thing, what is coming out, that India is already late, and we should not miss the opportunity what has been achieved, and we have to catch up very fast and bring this hydrogen as soon as possible in our country. And it is a very good opportunity what Sterle has offered, that he prepared to offer his knowledge to create a center of excellence in India. Now we should grab this opportunity either through the government or in the private sector to create this center of excellence, which become the nodal point to create from the technology to the regulatory to the transportation to the safety aspect of this. So I think it's a great opportunity what has been offered, and India should take it. And I think PhD should initiate now writing to the ministries, writing to the government about this opportunity, what has been created through PhD and available by Sterle from the Norwegian government as well as the organizations in Norway. And with this few words, really it has been very interesting. And even I gained a lot from this. And I assure you, Sterling, with your this introductory comprehensive presentation, will keep you bothering to get more and more information, and even the technologies and the joint ventures, what you could offer to us, to India. And we are looking forward with keen interest to your next visit to India. Now I hope within few months the international flights will open. With these few words, I deeply thank you very much on the behalf of PhD, on the behalf of our committee in environment, and particularly this topic is of great interest from the environment point of view also. With these few words, I thank you very much, and thank you to all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Now I invite Mr. Mahinder Rustagi to make his vote of thanks, formal vote of thanks to all the participants and to Mr. Sterling and everyone.
Yeah, from the core of my heart, I express my gratitude and thanks to Mr. Sterling, who has been known to me for a couple of years, but I had seen that he was an authority on the process safety, but I never knew this is a new aspect that I think by your just mere offer to open a center of excellence. Now I'm sure our country through the medium of the chamber would enrich on this subject and take your knowledge. I think the presentation has been elucidating, starting from the production, as the chairman environment committee said, starting from the production to the regulatory aspect, how safe it is, how good storable this from the transportation angle, and it could be it's a zero emission. That's the best part. I think there have been some misconception about the cost, which they have allayed those misconceptions that of course for the at present it is little costlier, but maybe the 5 years down the line this is going to be absolutely competitive. In United States, I read somewhere in California there is intense use of hydrogen. There are more than 200 hydrogen stations. All the vehicles, they are fitted with the kits and the cells, and then they are operating, and it's a very successful and the well tested and tried the energy source, which I'm sure, and of course it meets out the climatic the requirement as it is it reduces the carbon dioxide. And you also very nicely explained the catch involved in this expensive proposition, which in due course of time is going to be far more competitive and comparable to. But the only thing which lacks is definitely the awareness. Awareness has been low, which I'm sure, I think it's a very good beginning through the platform of PhD Chamber, that this concept is gaining the more and more the awareness, and this concept of course is going to be the most successful in the days to come. My special thanks to the leadership, Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, the Senior Vice President, and Dr. Mehta, Ms. Kanchan, and the Chairman Environment Committee, Dr. JP Gupta, Mr. Padar. But not the least, but the many thanks to all the participants with their active participation and the very nice the questions, because the presentation is never complete unless the doubts are clarified, which Mr. Sterling has done it very well. So thanks a lot all the participants, and I'm sure the chamber in future would organize such more interesting events so that this concept become is not a dream, we can actually see live in India. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.